I'm Luke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is Mixed to Tape,
the podcast where we talk about audio, from recording to mastering and everything else in between.
We're here to start discussions and help answer your questions.
Let's get started. Luke, what's happening, man?
Hello.
How are you?
How are you doing?
Good. It's been a couple of weeks, or a few weeks since we've been here last.
Yeah. I finished two commencements. I worked the Ithaca College commencement. We did that for a whole week, and then I did Cornell's commencement last weekend.
How did those go? Good.
Yeah, I mean they went great. You're waking up at 2, 3 in the morning, so you could be on site in time. The Cornell one's always the completely insane.
Is it the day of the event?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Cornell is not equipped to handle like the 30,000 people that they teach. And then, of course, you bring in parents and grandparents and kids, and now you have like 60,000 people who are all trying to get on campus, potentially more. So you have to be like on site already setting up by like 6:30 in the morning. It's completely nuts.
And what time does it start usually?
My thing started at 10 and ended at, it was great. It would ended at like 10:45 or 11.
Oh, wow.
But then you're sitting in traffic to try to get out because
that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. So it's all behind me now. Everything went great. People were very happy, so that's good.
Excellent.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just busy with my usual day-to-day work and nothing really new in life. My daughter turned 3, which was exciting.
Yes, she did.
She turned 3, which is like crazy. That's mind-boggling. She's like turning into she's been her own person for the last year or so, but yeah, just every day she's learning something new, and the things that she retains is amazing.
And it's terrifying?
And very terrifying. Like she'll say something that happened like 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, what? You remember that?
Yeah. Did you throw like a big party for her and stuff?
Actually, we threw a really small party for her. Yeah. We did a big party for her first birthday, and now that we have 2 children, it's like the thought of inviting, even if it was just inviting family over and feeding them and like doing that, we're just like, we don't want to deal with that stress,
Yep. Yeah.
So we did a little camp out in the backyard with her best friend, and we're really good friends with their parents. So we camped out in the backyard. It was super low key, and it was amazing.
That's fun.
I mean, we made it all night in the tent.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cook marshmallows and stuff?
No, but we did. She wanted Jell-O for her birthday cake.
Okay. Hey, that's easy.
We gave them Jell-O because we got stuff for s'mores.
Uh-huh.
And then after we gave them the Jell-O, we all looked at each other and were like, no s'mores, no more sugar. It was amazing.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Let's get back into the swing of things.
Here we go. Well, Luke, in case you missed it, a 2-story Soho building that was bought by the late John Lennon and Yoko Ono in 1971 is on the market again.
What?
For a meager $5.5 million.
That's it?
That's it.
Wait, so you're saying if I won the lottery tomorrow, I could have John Lennon's house?
You could. 496 Broome Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So you like living in Soho?
Yeah, right. So right now it's about 3,800 square feet, but with current zoning allows it to be built out to approximately 7,500 feet. But still, for $5.5 million, it's a bargain, right?
It's a bargain. Room for renovation? Does it come with any amenities?
It has a really lovely looking kitchen, which the website that I pulled up, it looks like a 3D rendering. I can't imagine that being the actual kitchen, but if it is, I don't know who did that.
Yeah.
They need to find a new line of work.
It's 1970s.
Yeah.
Anything else?
There's a wonderful looking studio that's included if you purchase this building in Soho.
A studio? A
Yeah.
recording studio?
Well, it looks just like a wall with like egg cartons on the a room with egg cartons on the wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Great. Sold.
I'll take two. I have a small one for you. A small in case you miss it. It's not really. Um, it's a callback to our last episode. I tried the new Logic. I know you did too. I guess we both tried it. I wasn't able to mess around with the stem splitting because they only let the M1 Macs do that, and I don't have an M1 Mac. I'm still in the Intel. But I was messing around with the new instruments that they included. They have a piano, strings, brass, and I forget the third or the fourth one.
Bass, right?
Is it a bass?
I believe so.
Okay, I was going to say bass, but I will say that the piano is absolutely lovely. It's like so much fun. It does the pedal modeling, so like when you release the pedal, it sounds like the pedal's releasing on a grand piano.
Yeah.
You can mix and match different microphones from the piano, so you can like tailor the sound. I will say that, between us audio nerds, I still had to tweak the audio a little bit. I had to EQ it kind of hard, and I ended up going in there with that the Soothe plugin from Oak
Yep.
Sound. Is it Oak or is it Oak?
I think it's oak.
Oak Sound. To try to, there was some weird resonances in there that I still had to get out, but very, very, very lovely sound.
Like low end, high end resonances.
Yeah, there was some low end kind of just like gunk that I just couldn't mix out.
Yeah.
But I have like a really, really solid piano sound now. And it's interesting. I actually tried the UAD, the Ravel instrument that they had. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
I like the Logic sound better. Even the brass sounds that they have now are actually like brass sounds. They're not just synth waves just like being thrown at you. They actually like you
right.
can hear like the buzzing of the
Like a
lips.
mouthpiece kind of?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you get like some of that brassy kind of buzzy sound.
I mean, even before the update, I thought like all that brass stuff sounded pretty good for $200 included.
It sounds
you know?
really solid now. The strings
Yeah.
sound really solid. They're still not the best that there is on the market, but for $200, I kind of can't believe that you can get something sounding really darn close to
Yeah.
real.
Yeah. Oh, and so I did test out the stem splitting thing, and it works. If you take all the stems and compare it to the original and flip the polarity, it zeroes out. So it's an equal sum,
Okay.
I guess. But if you listen to the individual parts, you can definitely hear some artifacts here and there. So you're not going to be able to, stripe away drums from your favorite record and do whatever you want to do with it. But it doesn't sound that good, But
Okay.
it could be. I could see it being usable for certain things.
Can't do unspeakable things to Freddie Mercury's voice.
You would.
What else you got?
Last one, Willie Nelson's releasing, or he has released a new album called The Border. It was released just a month after he turned 91. He's really getting up there. He's looked like he's been 91 for a long time, though.
Is that what weed does to you?
I guess so.
Just levels you out.
Yeah, right. Once you hit like 60, you just look like you're 91 until you die.
Yeah.
His collection is the latest in Nelson's more than 100 album-long discography. Yeah, if you want to go see him this year, he's playing in New Jersey, Camden, New Jersey, at the Freedom Mortgage Pavilion. He's bringing his popular 4th of July picnic there. And if you get tickets, which are probably sold out, sorry to break it to you, Luke, you can see Nelson, Bob Dylan, Robert Plant, and Alison Krauss, and Mavis Staples. So they're pretty cool. I'd like to see Robert Plant and Alison Krauss, personally.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan, I'd like to see him just to say I saw him, but
We saw him up here in Ithaca. He actually he came through in Ithaca in 2019.
yeah.
The venue that he was in was pretty echoey.
Yeah.
But the band was absolutely solid. The band was one of
Yeah.
the best I've heard. And he gets out there and he just like does his growly thing, his little
Yeah.
Bob Dylan thing. It was cool.
Sweet.
All right.
All right.
There's no more news.
No more news. I mean, there is, but
Nope. No more news. So we're we're going to try something a little bit different from our usual format today. We were discussing earlier kind of how to do this, and I thought that we should try something more like a, I don't know, lecture format. So, Tyler, I'm going to teach you today about
Yes.
loudness. Um, Loudness. It's funny. It's one of these topics that like I feel like especially for newbies, you talk about loudness and it sounds like this really kind of boring thing. How can you possibly talk about loudness for any longer than like 30 seconds, right? Something
Yeah.
is loud. We know something is loud because it hurts our ears, or something is quiet because we can't hear it. Everybody complains about how quiet dialogue is in movies these days. Well, that's actually because of a problem with loudness, right?
Do you watch movies with subtitles on or TV shows with subtitles?
So I do, unless the cinematography demands that I don't.
Yes. Okay.
So I recently watched the new Dune. That
I have not watched it yet.
it's unbelievable.
Maybe I'll
It's
start tonight.
so good. But you can't watch with subtitles on. It just, I don't know. It just ruins the whole experience.
Yeah. I'm really bummed I missed that in IMAX.
Yeah. Oh
Say
my
loudly.
gosh. I mean, can we just pause and say how much I love Denis Villeneuve? He's such an incredible director.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Anyways, loudness. So I think fundamentally, how do we know our mix is too loud? How do we know our mix is too quiet? What even is loudness? The illustration that I always make is I'm listening to some music and it's too quiet, or I'm mixing some music and it's too quiet. So I grab my master knob and I turn it up. It got louder. So the mix is louder, right?
So when you say your master knob, are you talking about like your master in like your DAW or like your volume controller?
Either one. Let's say I'll just take my headphone knob and I'll grab that and I'll turn it up. Um, it got louder, but my mix in Pro Tools is still the exact same loudness that it was.
Right.
So I have another illustration that I've prepped for us here. I have a fun little instrument that I made with Arturia pigments. Here we go. Nice little chord.
Nice.
Okay, so that is a reasonable loudness. Didn't blow our ears off. It wasn't too quiet. So I can play that exact same chord at the exact same speed, the exact same velocity. I'll play it just as hard. The difference this time is it's going to go through a compressor that I've turned up the volume all the way up. It goes to another compressor that I've turned the volume all the way up. And then it goes to one more compressor where I've turned it down to be the same loudness that it was before. And it sounds like this.
Yeah, it
And
sounds like I'm at the dentist.
yeah, it sounds like you're at the dentist. And of course, like as it starts getting quieter, that distortion goes away. So what we're hearing there is we have pushed the level so far inside Pro Tools that it's loud and it's distorting. So even though it's the same loudness at the end of the day, we have distorted somewhere within this chain. We have overdriven the signal chain. So loudness. So let's talk about loudness, but let's also first talk about human ears and how humans hear loudness. I always feel like that's a good place to start.
Yeah, everyone has a set of ears.
Yes.
Mostly everyone's work.
Yes. One factoid that was thrown at me early in my career that sort of blew my mind was that humans are really bad at hearing very fast changes with audio. We don't hear, when you think of a sine wave, the peaks, right?
Yep.
We don't actually hear the peaks. As loud as those peaks get, we don't perceive the sound wave to be that loud. It turns out that human hearing actually is much closer to the average of that sound wave. So how do we take the average of a thing that goes up above zero and down below zero? If you were just take that average, it would just be zero.
Right.
So what we do is we take the root mean squared, which is a very fancy math term for saying we take all the values above zero and square it. We take all the values below zero, we square it, we average all those values together, and then we take the square root of it. You end up with about like point 0.7 something. If the loudness is, one peak and minus one down below, we perceive it at about zero point 0.7. So that's the RMS value. Why are we talking about RMS? RMS and these average values brings us to the famous VU meter. The VU meter we've seen on every console. We see it every time they do like a little documentary with a tape machine, and you see the little meters like dancing around, right? So those are our little VU meters. Those VU meters stands for voltage units. Shows us sort of the average loudness of the electricity that is flowing through our system. We have sound that is coming out of our mouths, out of our instruments, being recorded and turned into electricity. We can then calibrate those meters to read 0 at a certain voltage setting. The original standard was about 1.23 volts. Those numbers don't necessarily mean anything. The reason I bring them up is mostly just to illustrate that the voltage of the electricity moving through our consoles is the loudness within our consoles. So
Right.
More voltage, more loudness, less voltage, less loudness. And of course, the circuitry within our consoles and our audio systems, all the circuitry will dictate how much voltage we can handle before we start distorting, before we start overloading our system. So knowing where 0 VU is and knowing that's sort of your target, that's a good place to start. Well, so the problem with 0 VU and using VU meters is it doesn't really tell us where our ceiling is.
Right.
And this kind of brings us, I like to think it sort of brings us over to Pro Tools, where, Pro Tools is a digital system and has a very, very, very hard ceiling. Analog systems, not so much. I mean, you and I both have, I think, driven pretty hard into analog consoles and you get a pretty good sound out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you drive hard into Pro Tools, what we get, you get that.
Right.
No good. So many, many, many years ago, after the VU meter was very much in vogue, they came up with the PPM meter, the peak program meter. The idea is that wherever distortion happens, that's our 0 point. And as long as we don't hit 0, we're not distorting. That's easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Problem, of course, with the PPM meter is the meter tends to move very, very quickly. So it doesn't quite give you an accurate picture of how loud something feels to us humans.
Right.
It has to respond quickly. If we were just doing average values, you could have peaked and distorted somewhere within that average happening. There was a lot of back and forth for a long time in the audio community about which was better, VU, PPM. People butt heads a whole lot. And then this big nerd mastering engineer named Duro comes along and he comes up with the Duro meters. These meters that when I originally saw them, I thought they were absolute genius. They are meters that show us both VU and PPM sort of superimposed over one another. If you haven't seen a Duro meter, I highly encourage you to look them up. They're great. If you have Pro Tools, we have something very similar in Pro Tools called the K meter, the K20, K14, and K12.
Yep.
You are free to look up what those numbers mean. I won't get into them, but they're very similar in that the way they work is the full bar at the bottom from all the way to minus infinity to wherever your audio loudness is. That's essentially your VU meter. And then there's a little tiny bar that dances up above, and that's your PPM meter. What's fun about the Duro meters and these K meters is the closer that PPM reading is to the VU reading, kind of gives us a somewhat accurate idea of how compressed our audio is.
Right.
Or how not transient it is, might be a better way to put it. So finally, this brings us to LUFS, loudness units full scale, loudness units relative to full scale. Essentially what we do is we say 0 0 within our digital systems is the peak, that's the top.
Yep.
And then we measure how close we are to 0 using these loudness units. One thing that kind of sets the LUFS apart is where all other meters are kind of instantaneous. The VU meter is telling you your loudness right at this moment, PPM right at this moment. The LUFS meter is designed to, it can show you loudness right at this moment, but it can also show you loudness over the duration of playback, which gives us a much more accurate idea of how loud something is over the course of its, program material. The nice thing about LUFS is, it's pretty widely adopted at this point. Pretty much every major organization in the world uses LUFS as a way to dictate how loud they want things to be. And then this kind of creates a lot of really great scenarios for us. It sort of levels out all audio that is being played back within a system, so it's all relatively the same loudness. We don't have to reach for volume knobs to turn something up or down. It creates, how do I put this? It like sort of sets expectations. I think we've all had situations where we were watching some sort of movie or something on our TV and we had to crank our TV up to 11 just to hear it, and then I don't know, you go and turn on like a normal Netflix show and suddenly your like ears are getting blown off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's partly because there was some loudness rule that wasn't followed between those two things. Every organization has their own sort of loudness setting. So as an audio engineer, it's important that we all are at least familiar with where we're distributing our audio to and sort of what their rules are. Apple Music requires music to be mixed to -16. I think that actually varies depending on the kind of program material. I think that -16 is closer to like classical music.
Right.
I feel like I've heard, I don't know if you've heard, but I feel like I've heard some Apple Music like going into the single digits in terms of loudness.
Oh, wow.
But I don't know. Spotify and YouTube are both at -14. Netflix, on the other hand, is at -27.
Yeah.
Why is it so different? Why is Netflix so? Why is it so much quieter? Because Netflix is not dealing with music. Music is sort of one loudness. It's kind of one experience from start to finish. Whereas Netflix is a TV show, very quiet parts, very loud parts.
It's very dynamic.
Yeah, and so overall, the experience is going to be much quieter.
Right.
That being said, Netflix is -27, HBO is -23.
Right.
It's 4 dB louder.
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts. When you're hearing this podcast will be mixed to -16 plus or minus 1 LUF. So it'll be somewhere between -17 and -15.
So could you also say that whenever the LUFS will determine like the dynamic range of a program?
Yeah.
Is that how it relates? So usually the lower the number, the more dynamic it will be?
Theoretically. It's the idea is that because it's quieter, you have more room for louder things to happen. If your song is mixed to -16 or even -10,
right.
You're right. You don't have as much
The whole thing
room.
has to be kind of
Yeah,
bumped up.
yeah, pushed up, or especially the louder things have to be pulled down.
Right.
And it's a much more compressed and kind of, I don't know, claustrophobic experience.
Yeah.
Even sometimes hitting the -16 target for a podcast can feel a little constricting. For me,
Yeah.
I feel like I want the vocals to breathe a little bit more, to have a little
Right.
bit more dynamic range. But -16 is nice because
It is nice.
even when I'm getting a little bit quieter, I know that I tend to sort of drift down at the end of my sentences. It'll push those parts up and make my whole spiel that much easier to hear, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that translates well, especially if you're in noisy environments. Like I go down to the city one day a week. If I'm listening to a podcast that's not at a certain level, it's really hard to hear. You can hear just bits and pieces of what people are saying.
Now, do you have to deal with loudness and things like that when you're mixing for Sesame Street?
I do not. I mean, I kind of keep it in the back of my head, in the back of my mind. Like when I deliver my mixes, I'm somewhere in the mid -20s.
Okay.
But since I'm just delivering music to the supervising post mixer, right, the remixer, he deals with music, sound effects, and dialogue. So the music is a small part of the final level of what's delivered to HBO.
Okay.
So I'm trying to deliver him something at a volume where it's going to sit at unity for the most part. You know what I mean?
Where he can set the level, he can just put it in the mix wherever it needs to
At
be.
zero, right?
And
And then if there's some dialogue, he'll kind of dip it down a little bit, or if he wants to increase it, he can do that. But it's not like sometimes we get mixes from other mixers, and it's at like clipping at like minus 0.1 dB, and it's like you have to bring the fader down to like negative 16 just to kind of get it to sit there. I don't want the mixer to have to do that. So yeah, I don't deal with it directly, but indirectly I do, and I'm trying to be aware of the person downstream of me and trying to make their job a little easier.
now, do you know if he will then take your music and compress it at all? Will he try to push more out?
No, I do very light limiting to my music cues. It's just kind of shaving off some of the peaks. So I try and it's almost like a little bit of a mastering, just so I can get it sitting at a certain volume.
But will he master it at all?
No,
Okay.
no,
Interesting.
yeah. So when I hear it back, when I watch down the episode, we all get Frame.io links to watch it and take and put notes down. And when I hear it back, it's just about at the same volume as I sent it to him. And it depends, like I said, like if we have a cue that is kind of under dialogue, sometimes he'll dip it down more than where we have it. Or if it's like a really exciting like game show cue or something, sometimes he'll push that a little bit louder, which I always like. But yeah.
So you bring up a good point, and that is, I think that a lot of newer engineers will see these numbers and think, "Oh, I'm mixing a song. I should get one of those fancy LUFS meters." Isotope Insight is my personal preference. I'm not sure what you use, but you throw up Insight at the end of your signal chain, and you just start mixing until you get minus 16, right? You shouldn't do that.
Right.
Like the minus 16 is for the mastering stage, and
Right.
pretty much until your thing is meant to be delivered, it should be mixed much quieter. I feel like the industry standard is probably somewhere between like minus 24 to like minus 20 at the most,
Yeah.
with plenty of headroom. Essentially,
Yeah.
the idea is you don't want to deliver something to a mastering engineer that has been so hyper compressed that there's nothing they can do with it.
Right.
And so, I mean, you incidentally do this, but it sounds like most of the content in HBO ends up not being that compressed anyways.
Yeah.
So, some other final thoughts that I had as we kind of wrap up a little bit here. There are also, not only are these, minus 16, minus 14 targets, there's a little bit of wiggle room within these targets. There's also peak levels within these targets. A lot of places will dictate, Apple Podcasts, for instance, I think is minus 16. And if I remember right, it's minus 2 peak. So any of my peaks are not allowed to go above minus 2. Or maybe it's minus 1.
Minus 2 dB
Yeah.
full scale.
Yeah. LUFS. The idea being that you never want to get all the way to 0. Most of these places never want you to get to 0. And the reason for that is if you ever get audio close to 0, when you go to do a lossy compression of whatever the audio is, those peaks will tend to distort. They tend to cause overs on the lossy compression process. So most places will have some sort of hard ceiling that they're looking for. Even like Netflix, minus 27, but don't go above, I think it's like minus 3. So thinking about LUFS, like let's set all the LUFS and all those kind of loudness things aside. How should we think about mixing, in our studio? Thinking about loudness and things like that. For me, my favorite way to mix to make sure I hit kind of the right kind of loudness is I like to set my headphones and my speakers before I've started mixing. So I'll play some music from my computer or I'll play some music out of Pro Tools or something like that. And I set the volume until it sounds loud enough. Loud enough for me is around 80 dB within the room. then I know that as I'm mixing, if it sounds too quiet, I don't have to necessarily look at the meters. I can just start pushing things up,
Push it, yeah.
right?
You know when it sounds right.
Right. And the beauty of this is that I know if I push it up, I'm not going to clip at the end
Right.
because if I'm clipping, it's going to sound too loud for me.
Yeah.
So the rule is you set your loudness, you play your music, you set your loudness, and then you're not allowed to touch your master knob ever again.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember when working at Avatar, we would do film mixes, and we always would calibrate the monitors. I think it was minus 82 dB, and then you leave the monitor there, and they would just mix to that. So everyone knows, or the mixer would know what sounds too loud, what sounds too quiet, and what they were going for, and you never touch the volume knob.
I mean, if you did, God, you'd have to recalibrate.
Yeah, right. I remember I was working on a jazz session, and we didn't calibrate it to minus 82, but then he engineered. It was my first time working with him. He didn't tell me not to touch the volume, and I adjusted the volume, and I moved it without him knowing, and he came back, and he was hyper aware that it didn't sound right because everything sounded quieter, and he was like, "Why did you do that? Never do that again." So after that moment, every time the volume was set by the engineer, I'd put a piece of tape down and mark where they had it. Just as a reference point in case if it did get turned down.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good idea.
But then it also was always made me wonder why mix engineers for music didn't work that way. It seemed kind of arbitrary a lot of the times where they would set the volume.
Yeah, and you could set yourself up for trouble.
Oh yeah.
Like sometimes my system will get a little bit miscalibrated or whatever, and I'm mixing, and suddenly I'm clipping.
Right.
Or the meters are way too low. I'm looking at my meters and they're only hitting the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And you're
it's oh, this sounding great. And you look in your session, it's yeah, not even hitting in the middle. You're now I got to bring everything up and everything gets thrown off. Yeah.
Yeah. Now your compressors are responding the way you expect them to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So master knob discipline.
Discipline, yes.
So yeah, when I touch the master knob, you set it, never touch it again. I have a little dim button and I have a mute button, and that's what I use. Spacebar works too.
Yeah.
No, I remember similarly at the studio, wanting to mute something, and instead of just hitting the mute button, I grabbed the fader and I brought it down, and it was that was really foolish.
Right. Where was that now?
Yeah. It's too late. It's gone. So I think that sort of brings me to the end of this goofy lecture on loudness. Tyler, do you have any thoughts for the class?
No, I think you mostly covered everything. Yeah. I guess takeaways. Yeah, I guess I don't know if we really went over this, but when to really think about LUFs and who's really using them as far as delivery,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So it's like we spoke before, just I don't really have a number that I hit, but the guy that mixes and delivers HBO, he has to worry about that. Should people be worrying about that in their day-to-day music mixing or?
I think that having a LUFS meter for just your average mixing engineer isn't necessarily a bad idea, but thinking about those final numbers is where you get tripped up. I think if you're using a LUFS meter to make sure you're hitting a minus 24 target or something like that, great.
Yeah.
Go for it. So I have to use my LUFS meter when I'm mixing for the podcast, but that's because I'm my own mastering engineer for this one.
Right.
So that kind of makes sense. I don't know. Yeah, I like my little Insight plugin, even if I'm not mastering something. But yeah, you definitely want to be aware of kind of what those final numbers should be, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, here. There it is. That's what it's supposed to sound like. And with that, I think we've wrapped podcast number 5.
Number 5 in the bag.
Tyler, anything you want to say to the class?
No, I don't. Well, yeah. Throw a LUFS meter on your master output and see what it's doing.
Yeah, can't hurt.
No?
There's some decent free ones out there. We will find them and we will post them.
Yes.
And with that, goodbye, everybody.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe. We put out new episodes every other Thursday. If you liked what you heard, take a second to give us a review. Every review helps new listeners find us. If you'd like to support us, you can find us on Patreon. We have some perks for our new subscribers and plans for more as we continue and grow. If you'd like to join the conversation, find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching Mixed to Tape Podcast. If you'd like to contact us, write us at mixedtotapepodcast@gmail.com. We can't wait to hear your questions. Thanks, and we hope to see you next time.